right, that's loud. Sorry, I'll pull it back. Good evening, everyone. I am so excited to introduce Sheri Wiedenhoffer to you. She is our presenter for this evening. We're actually going to tag team this a little bit. Sheri works with Community Justice Center, and she is a adjunct professor at Fresno Pacific University, and I had the great opportunity to take conflict studies, or peace and conflict studies with her this summer. And so she's going to talk to us about conflict, because how many of you have conflict in your homes? Both hands? Right, conflict is inevitable, and she's going to talk about all that. So I'm going to hand it off to her now. Here we go.
All right, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about, am I asking this question too? We're going to do this kind of together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about conflict and a little bit about Community Justice Center. So we've been around a couple of years. We came from Fresno Pacific University's Center for Peacemaking. So Center for Peacemaking ran a lot of restorative justice work, and that moved over to the Community Justice Center in July of 2020. So we are very, very grateful to be in that spot. The reason why we're talking about restorative justice, what Community Justice Center, what we're trying to do around addressing when harm is caused or when conflict is happening. Like what do we do when harm is caused? Do we have the capacity to address that, to heal it? And so when we talk about Community Justice Center, we really talk about how are we creating community healing, how are we dealing with conflict and engaging that in a way that's really affirming and helps us get to another side of it, get to the core of it, heal it, get to the other side of it, and then address it in a healthy way. So that's what we do at the Community Justice Center. Oh, we have it right up there. We, this is from brokenness to wholeness, trauma to healing, harm to restoration. We actually know that healing doesn't come unless we're addressing the harm that was caused. We either have to name it, we have to say it, we have to know it, we have to address it in some way. If we can do that with the other person, that brings ultimate mutual healing, but even just in ourselves, we all know that that's kind of how we get through those things. So we do work with individuals, families, and schools. And what we're really trying to do is give people an opportunity to address harm and restore harm and repair harm before it becomes a punitive situation, which means before you call the cops. Can we resolve some things together as a community? Can we do that together? So if it's, we work with youth, so if young people get caught in what we would consider a crime, whether that's just picking up somebody's headphones off their desk and taking off out the door, that can be a crime. They can get charged for that. So we work with youth all the way in a preventative way. So we get referrals from court, probation, law enforcement, schools, communities, churches, and we have an opportunity to restore that and repair that. So what would happen is the young person would agree to be a part of the process and meet with a person that they caused harm with. The person who caused harm would meet with that person. Are you willing to meet with the person who caused you harm? And if there's an agreement between both parties, we bring everybody together, and they actually make an agreement together about what needs to be done to make that right. The cool thing about that is that if they do that and it's already hit the criminal justice system, they never get charged with a crime. And the other thing about that is they get to restore their obligations to the community, and like if they've graffitied somebody's fence, they can repair that, they can pay for it, they can do whatever. And for the folks that have a home or something that's been violated or taken advantage of, they don't feel afraid anymore. So the victims are very, very, actually they're very satisfied, and they have the best experience out of that as well. And then we work with folks that are inside prison, and then we work with reentry programs as well. So people that are coming out from long-term incarceration, we also have reentry circles of support and accountability where they get to come and spend a year in covenant with trained volunteers, and it's just like a small church, small group in a way, but we just talk about things that are going on. We share, we all share as a community, but it's really about the person coming back after a long-term incarceration, how to make things as right as possible, make amends, and do that. So that's kind of the scope of Community Justice Center. And we are on First and Shaw, and we're really happy to be in our home there. And that's what I met you. Okay, so, is there another slide? Next one? There it is. Okay, so, when you think of conflict, can we do that? What is the first word, a feeling, or thought that comes to mind when you think of conflict? If you just, everybody pick a word. Just start with it and say it out. Okay. What? Anger? A problem? Opinion? Uncomfortable. Stressful. Painful? Yes. Any other ones that come to mind, words when you think of conflict? Also, right? Yeah, conflict is a really kind of a great opportunity to be aware that something needs to be paid attention to when we're feeling that spot, when it's not really feeling very good. And we think, what's happening? What do I need to be paying attention to? That's what makes conflict natural and normal and necessary. I mean, most things that change or create some kind of meaningful impact in us has to do with the conflict, where something has been coming up, needs to be paid attention to, and then we create change. We do something about that. And that can be sometimes harmful. Sometimes we don't deal with conflict very well. Most of us have experiences where conflict goes so badly that we don't ever want to engage it because it just becomes hurtful and harmful, and that doesn't get addressed, and then it can be cyclical around that. And so what we're trying to do and can do is figure out what we can do with conflict so that it becomes natural, normal, and necessary, and we can make it useful in our lives and in our relationships for what it's intended to be. So even when you read scripture with conflict in mind as natural, normal, and necessary, you'll see all those places where that comes up. You know, it's a conflict and it creates an opportunity for something. So, yes. Oh, are they there? There? Okay. You want me to go through the cycle right now? Yes. Okay. So this is my favorite thing I've ever learned from the Center for Peacemaking is this cycle. And if you are with me and you're coming and you're telling me something that's going on, and if I have a napkin or anything, I'll probably just start drawing the circle. And I'll probably walk this through. So think of a conflict, a recent conflict that you have experienced or are experiencing right now. Is there anybody that can't think of one? Okay, so, yeah, everybody's got one? Really think of something right now that you're just thinking, it doesn't have to be a big deal, it can be a very big deal, but just what's a conflict that you are experiencing right now? If you can identify that, that's going to be really helpful because we're going to walk through this cycle of unmanaged conflict with that. So the first stage of conflict is when there's some kind of confusion, some kind of tension, some kind of change. Like right now, if I just said, you know, I know I'm new here, but I think it would be best if we just walked out and we just had our session in the middle of the street outside. That's a change. But everybody would probably react a little bit differently about that. Some may say, oh, okay. Some would say, no, who are you, whatever. Think of all the different ways we could respond just to that change. So change is kind of the core piece of what is creating conflict. So if you can think about the initial change or whatever the tension or whatever that is in the conflict that you are being aware of right now, does that resonate? Was there a change or was there a tension? Was there some kind of confusion? Was there something that you can relate to with that, with the conflict? So that's the first stage. Can we drop that? Is it animated? Yeah, the slide? Great. Okay, so right when you feel that there's a change or a tension, this is the greatest time to get curious about where that tension's coming from. Just to get curious about it. Most conflict is associated with change, but we experience that change, we experience it in an emotional way. We experience it as confusion, tension, discomfort, some of the words that we were describing. That's how we experience it because it is a change and it's associated with change. And it may seem like not a very big deal, so we're not going to do something about it at that time. It just seems small. So we're just going to let it go, right? We're going to kind of think about that. We avoid it, we don't say anything, we don't make a big deal about it. Does that make sense? It's just a change. But we're thinking, wow, something's going on here. And I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling tension. But I haven't really named it out loud. So most of the time it is a change. And so what that does is it kind of takes us out, if we realize that, before we make a judgment on it, we just go, oh, there's a change. So if you can identify that, that's great. The second stage, when we go from there, we're feeling uncomfortable about it, we're not addressing it, we're not saying anything about it. So the next part of that is the stage 2. We start trying to figure out, why is this happening? Whose fault is it? We usually get to that pretty quickly. Is it my fault? Is it the other person's fault? Why am I experiencing this discomfort? What's happening in the situation? And we start to think about what the other person's doing. We start actually kind to, the tension actually starts to build up a little bit. Does that make sense? Does that resonate? The tension just kind of starts to build up. So as you're building up, and that tension, it's kind of harder to stop now because you start thinking, Whose responsibility is it? Now, often, at least for I will speak for me, it's always the other person. This fault it is. I mean, always. And not only am I sure of that, I'm pretty sure of my intentions, and I'm pretty sure that that's what's happening. So we get to the third stage, and once I figure that out, that it's the other person's issue, something's gone on with the other person, then we start with this, this injustice collecting. Okay, so it's like, well, this isn't the only time this has happened, right? This has happened before. There's other things that are like this. This person has done this multiple times, or in a different way, or, does that make sense? We start building, so then, because it's unresolved, we start looking for those injustices, and they feel like they're not. They feel like they're injustices. They feel like there's something not right with this relationship, and we're starting to keep track of it. We're starting to keep track of the things that aren't right. Does that make sense? Is it resonating? So we just start building that up. We don't even realize we're doing it most of the time. It's just happening, right? So when the injustice, we start feeling a little more negative. We may not show up to something. We may start changing our behavior a little bit when we're around this person. It's just something is just changing. And it's becoming more of this, more of a negative space, and we start to think it's always going to be that way. If you have a relationship where you felt that, it's always going to be that way. It's never going to change. Part of it is around these kinds of things, right? If we're kind of, as this framework is coming around. So the injustice, now this is what's happening. Often this list, now we're thinking about this list and we're not thinking about the original thing that was going on. Because now we've created a bigger story, right? So it's not about the original thing anymore. Now we've actually kind of started to build a case against a person in our life. Okay, we may be realizing it or we may not, but we're just starting to build a case about this person. We're starting to maybe be a little distrustful or a little cautious. We're starting to change our behavior, right, around this person. So we get to the next stage, and this is when we usually have so something happens, and we have an unplanned confrontation. So those of you on social media, when you see the post that you think somebody should not have pressed send on that, it's a reaction, right? It's like that post, it's that email, it's that. Oftentimes it can be, if you have a relational conflict, you can say, you start using the words like always and never, like you always do that, you never do that, and we start thinking, it's an unplanned confrontation. All of a sudden, something comes out, we didn't plan it, and it just kind of creates even more tension. It creates kind of a catalytic event around an unplanned confrontation. And so this always and never, if you're ever using those words, when you're getting those words used at you, it doesn't feel very good, right? You always, you never, because those are very judgmental kinds of words. And we're not clarifying. Once you say you always and you never, you're really not going to get at that thing that is really bothering us, right? Because we've just made a big statement about you're never going to change, you're always going to be doing this, those kinds of things. So typically at that point, there is some kind of more of a confrontation. Some words are said, something's happening, the family maybe witnesses it, there's things that are going on. And when that happens, the next stage is we usually just step back. We start stepping back in the relationship. Just take a break, get some distance, and that's usually what happens is we create some distance. And it may be just like I'm inside, I'm just going to be cautious of you. Or it may even be a physical thing, like I'm just not going to be around that person anymore. This is not the person I want to be around anymore. I just can't. And that third one is just if, sometimes it'll just be, I'll do whatever you say. I'm not going to question anymore. Just I'll do whatever you say, whatever you want. One party can just do that. I just can't deal with this anymore. I'm just going, whatever you want. And that shifts the kind of that equal part of a relationship where you're working on something together, right? So how does this resonate with you? Anybody? How does it resonate with the conflict that you have in your mind? Are we on point here? Is this on point?
Yes. It feels painfully understandable. And it's just, you can see how if you're not able to get your frontal lobe engaged and start thinking above the argument, it can take you all the way to divorce in 1 month. It's like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And it's all about the person instead of realizing we're not handling our conflict very well. We're just letting it become bigger than our relationship.
Mm-hmm. It becomes scary in some ways, right? We become fearful to engage it because we think what's going to happen, but we end up losing the relationship anyway when we're fearful. Okay. What else? Anybody else? Thoughts about this? How does it resonate?
For me personally, the way that I have seen my parents dealing with conflict, well, dealing.
Right,
It's
right.
like basically ended up in stage, like in the adjustment part, because obviously they were like coexisting, but it was not so much of a relationship after a fight, after an argument.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, okay, whatever you do, I'll do me. And like for me, like conflict in general, it doesn't matter what it is. Like the typical church, can you give me 5 minutes and we're gonna that's gonna be a small talk. I'm like, no, it's not gonna be small, and no, there's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's always like it causes like this anxiety inside of me. Right? Like it creates a lot of tension that makes me even want to throw up.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah, I feel that if everything is thought through, okay, something can be worked out. But whenever like all those stages happen, at least to the fourth point, I know that the automatic result is going to be
Mm-hmm.
kind of like withdrawing. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that cycle just keeps going, right? When you add violence into this cycle, so for us, our families of origin really do impact how we see the world too, our families of origin. So if we saw our parents or our family members not dealing with conflict very well and always pushing the other person away or seeing that, and we've seen that cycle become very violent. And when you have the cycle of violence that happens inside a home, that also continues to accelerate. So it may begin with a verbal abuse or verbal stuff, and then it just starts moving to a little push or a little shove, and it can get very violent. So many of us have been in that spot. And when that happens, it's an unmanaged conflict cycle that just starts like this. It just starts revolutioning up. And so you can be sure violence will continue. Violence will continue, and it will become more serious because it's never dealing with the actual part of that's starting that. So if we don't go back to whatever the actual thing is, these cycles they just will keep on going until usually when you hit that fifth stage, you say, I'm just stepping all the way out. All the way out. And we do that for lots of reasons. But what's incredible about life and what God does in our lives is often those people will come back in our lives in different ways, right? So God is still at work trying to figure out how these relationships work. But this right here is the best time when we say, when can you pull this cycle back into an unmanaged conflict cycle? From an unmanaged cycle, this is unmanaged. When is the best time to pull it back into managing it? What would that look like? Okay, anybody? Really, the best time is the very beginning when you're feeling the tension. If we get self-aware enough and we trust ourselves enough of what we're experiencing, so there's tension in this relationship. If you say there's tension in this relationship right now, I'm going to take a minute. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling the tension here? Is that other person feeling the same thing? And the best question at the best time right then is to say, are you feeling some tension right now? Because then you're going to be a we. What happens here is wherever you can get back to the we have something we got to work out. If we can't do it ourselves, let's find somebody to help us, but we have some things we need to address, right? It's not you have some things to work on, or I have to make the adjustments to be away from you. At some point in any part of this cycle, it's like we have something to work on. If we can't do it ourselves, let's get somebody to help us. And if that person is a good ally and friend, they will allow you to really speak freely with each other to address what it is that is really the thing. What is the thing? And I will say enough in this conflict engagement work that when I think that I know what the thing is, I never know what the thing is. Like if people come to me, married couples or work people or whatever, and they're coming like, we have this conflict with this person. I'm like, okay, let me talk to that person. See if they want to talk to you. Do you want to talk to them? Okay, let's bring it. They come in. I'm always wrong, 100% of the time. What I think is their issue or was going to be their issue. So if they were going to come into me and I was going to say, I'm going to counsel you on what I think your issue is, then I'm probably going to go a different direction than where they may be. But if I say, what is the issue for you? What is the issue for you? What do you need? What do you need? What do you need to say? What do you need to hear? What do you want to do to make this right? What do you want to do to work that out? That's a really pretty great process But then we have to be comfortable with somebody else being uncomfortable with somebody else that is uncomfortable. And then trust that we can kind of facilitate that. Does that make sense? Yeah? So the thing about conflict is because we carry our own, I would say we carry generations, and we carry our own families of origin, and we carry our own perspectives of how we're living in life. So who we are, we're super complex and beautiful and amazing, and we have so much, this huge capacity of emotion and thoughts, and who we are in our being is the most important thing in how we're engaging other people in our lives. And when we can trust that what we're feeling and experiencing, if there's some tension in a relationship, and if we can have enough courage, because courage and vulnerability are the exact same thing. You can have enough courage and vulnerability to go to that person and say, I'm feeling tension, do you feel tension too? Is there something we can do about it? And is it important enough, if we can't figure it out, can we ask somebody else that we trust to join us with that? That would be a way to manage a conflict cycle. And it's at any place. If you get to the distance part, man, if you've seen those blow-ups with people, or like this, and you've been a part of it, I've been a part of it, I've said things that I've regretted because I'm in the moment of something. You can start with an apology. You can start with an engagement. Hey, I was out of line when I did that, when I pressed that send, when I did that, I am sorry. I'm just going to start with that. Now, let's find our way back to the original thing. Because if you just address that blow-up, it's not resolving the conflict. You're just going to do it again, and again, and again. And then you just end in a cycle of apologies. And that doesn't restore or heal anything. So we do have to get back to the original thing, whatever that thing is for both people. Does that make sense? Any questions or thoughts?
It seems, I noticed that sometimes conflicts escalate because first one or both people don't feel heard. I mean, it's just the simplest little thing, like maybe someone can't give you the answer that you want, but if they can say, I'm really sorry. I know this means a lot to you, but for this reason, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And it can make you feel like they just don't want you to have something, or they don't care. And maybe there's something going on, and just simply explaining that a little bit helps them say, oh, is that why?
True. Yeah, what we think, all the things we build up that we think people think, they usually aren't thinking at all. But you are right, and we all know that. Like being seen and heard, cared for, valued, that's what we all desire. We all desire belonging. So when we have tension and we feel like we don't belong or somebody else shouldn't belong, we're doing that. That's just a human behavior, but we're all better when we feel seen and heard and cared for. If we can be strong enough to hear what somebody's saying that maybe we have hurt them and we didn't intend to, we don't have to be defensive about that. We can just say, I'm sorry. I don't want to do that again. That's the other thing. I'll just throw this in. Apologies, apologies we can be good at apologies, but I'm just going to say this about apologies. Apologies, a good apology is not, I'm sorry that you got upset that I was mad at you. When an apology starts with, I'm sorry you, that's not an apology, right? I'm sorry you did not get what I was saying. I'm sorry. That's not an apology. An apology has a few very specific things in them. I apologize for my behavior that caused you this kind of harm. I want to make a commitment to you that I acknowledge that, I will not do that again, and I want to know what I can do to make that right. That's an apology. And if you've had one of those, that feels good. We've all had the ones, I'm sorry you got upset. You're just so sensitive. Right? Yeah.
Apologies without actual change behavior is really just manipulation. Trying to get somebody getting out of the situation.
Like an appeasement.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so we are going to move on now to a table talk. And so we asked you to identify maybe a conflict that you have experienced. So around your tables, we want you to talk about, you don't have to explain you don't have to bare your soul and, share all your dirty laundry. But what we do want you to do is talk around your table about where you're finding yourself on this cycle in that conflict that you identified earlier. And so as you guys share around the table, just talk about, give a little bit of detail so that you can kind of explain maybe who the players are and explain exactly where you're finding yourself in that. So we're going to give you about 5 minutes to go through that together.
Just find your spot on the circle.
Show of hands, how many of you would say you're really good at managing conflict? How many of you say that you came from families that had really good, healthy conflict resolution? I think part of it is a cultural thing. We're real good about just, again, walking away from that conflict because we feel like that is, keeping the peace. Sometimes it's just walking away from it rather than actually working through it. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys it's an inventory of personal conflict management style. So you're going to start to assess how you as a person deal with conflict. And the unique thing about this particular survey is that it rates you both. How do you manage conflict when it's a peaceful situation? Maybe at the very, very beginning, that's stage 1. And then how do you manage it when you're all the way over at like stage 5? And so, because you might have different answers to the question based on the tension you're feeling and where you are in that cycle. So I'm going to pass these out, and we're going to give you a few minutes. We'll just play some music quietly in the background and let you guys get working on these. Yes, be honest as you possibly can, and don't overthink it either. Usually kind of like what your gut instinct is probably the right answer. When you start rationalizing why you're not that answer, that's probably a good sign that you need to go back to your first one.
when things are stormy. One thing we're just going to talk about in terms of, so you could take your time with this. You could even take it home and finish it up, but, right? Because do you need more time, anybody? Do you want to take a little more time?
What is this part for?
The what?
The last part.
You have to put them in order, right?
Oh.
You just copy down the scores.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure in order.
Well, you just do the top down, like, So with the higher your number, that's what you're like in that, if you're in a calm state, the higher your number. So if wherever your highest number is, that's how you're going to handle things when you're calm, typically. And then the highest number you have for the storm is likely your go-to conflict style. Does that make sense? Let's see. Does this resonate with you for how things are when things are stormy and like it's a really entrenched conflict, or like if it's just kind of calm and it's not that big of a deal? Hurricane. All right. Yeah. So if I get the quadrants right. All right, so we're gonna take this one step further, and I'm gonna have you on this part right here, just make a big plus sign. We're gonna do 4 quadrants there. Yeah, just 4 quadrants. Okay, I'm gonna use my hands for a minute. So anytime you have a conflict, if you have a 4 quadrant, so this is one axis, this is the other one. Okay, I'm gonna tell you what they are. So one is the issue. How important to you is the issue? So if you put that line that you have, that going up and down line, and you got an arrow going up and an arrow going down, if the issue is really important to you, you're gonna be at the high end of that. And if it's not very important to you, it's gonna be at the low end of that. Does that make sense? So every conflict or tension is coming from an issue and a relationship, and that's this one. So however important the relationship, here we go, the relationship is to you, if it's super important, the relationship is important, you're going to be over here. And if the relationship is not very important to you, you're going to be over here. Does that make sense? Now our conflict styles fit in how important those two things are. So if you really care about a person, well, let's start this. No, if you care about the issue, no, I'm going to start if you don't care about the issue or the person. Okay? You don't care about the issue or the person. Where are you going to be? Lower left. And what's that going to be for the conflict style? It's going to be avoiding, right? Like if you're in the grocery store, I happen to be a person that gets engaged in conflicts in the grocery store sometimes, but typically if somebody's not related to you, see something going on, you may not just even. You're just going to avoid it. There's no reason to engage it because neither of those things are important to you. Whatever the issue is and whatever the relationship is, not very important to you, right? Avoiding, right? So if you're avoiding something, you actually might know that I don't really care that much about that person or that thing that's going on right now. But avoiding, So avoiding sometimes is actually, I'm going to just give the shout out for that. Sometimes people that avoid conflict are actually very good watchers and they're aware of what's going on. They're just not stepping into it. But avoiding is just really not engaging the issue or the person. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you do care a lot about the relationship, but you don't care about the issue, what's your conflict style going to be? Accommodating. Yep, you're going to say that relationship is more important to me than this issue. So the relationship is more important to me than the issue, so I'm going to go ahead and accommodate that. When you get in an argument like that, and you're kind of saying, no, go ahead, whatever you want. You're saying the relationship is more important to you than that issue. It may not feel very good because you're actually not engaging in something that's going on together in your lives, but it's that style, right? Accommodating. Does that make sense? Okay. So if the issue is super important to you, it's far more important to you than the relationship, where are you going to be? You're going to be sort of in a forceful state. I don't know what it is. They have different words for it. Forceful is usually it. Authoritative can be one. So when the issue is really important, I'm going to say this. You know when you're having a conflict in work or something like that, and you get HR calls you and you have a paper slid in front of you, the paper is more important because that's when you know the issue is more important than you are right now. So you're going to have a conversation, right? That's how that is. So when the issue is more important than the relationship, that's going to usually typically be a power over kind of situation. Someone's going to be forceful in that situation. Now, I'm just going to say this. If you take that quadrant, those types of people that dominate in that way, if their thing is more the forceful, authoritative person, they're going to be really good in a relationship with someone who's super accommodating. Does that make sense? So if you're an accommodating person and you're just going to really care about that, you're going to be a good match for somebody that can be what really needs to make the decisions about things. But what that can often do to one party is that like you kind of lose your voice. You're not really saying what you really feel. You're really not being seen for who you are because actually you're not even saying what those things are. And for the person that's in that top quadrant too, that may not be the right relationship for trying to just figure out to hear and to know really what you're thinking and feeling and caring about. Does that make sense? So we do all of those things all of the time. Okay, the one if the relationship is important to you and the issue is important to you, also, which one is that? Collaborating. You're gonna figure it out. It takes longer, but you're going to figure it out together. That's how that works. Now, we use these. I'm going to tell you this. We use these conflict styles every single day, every single one of them. Every single one of them. There's not one that's better than the other. We're just in and out of them all the time. Your kid's going to put their hand on a hot stove. You're going to pull them back. You're not asking them what they're thinking or feeling about. That issue is really, really important. You're going to just rip them back out, right? We use these things all the time. Compromising is right in the middle. So compromising is that one right in the middle when you are trying to make sure everybody's getting a fair shot of the deal. Everybody needs to get what they need. Nobody's leaving with nothing, and nobody's leaving with everything. If you're the kind of person that kind of splits it up, everybody gets a fair deal, that's compromising. Right. Okay, does this make sense? Any comments, special things you want to share?
Well, I was just laughing because I have accommodating on both on my bottom of my list on both of them. I told you I was bad.
That's all right. What it just tells you is you just put relationships ahead of your own needs. That's what it's saying, that's beautiful. And there's things that now you can just maybe pay attention to in that way. Find your voice.
Okay, we're going to let you guys have about 5 minutes around your tables. So what I want you to do now is go back to that original conflict that you had been thinking about, and I want you to identify how you've already identified how you're responding to conflict. Now I want you to think about how the other people in that conflict are responding. Do you have avoiders? Do you have someone who's being forceful? And start to kind of identify maybe what those needs are, why they're acting the way they are based on what you learned about in this. So go ahead and talk about that at your tables.
What's your name? What's your name? You.
She's avoiding. No, she's avoiding again. Yeah. Yep. All right, so you guys can talk about that around your tables for a second. That's beautiful. Thank you, Tiffany. All right, we are going to go ahead and move on to our last section. But before we, no, I'll just go ahead and go with this. So we're going to now talk about power. And I'm going to really bring this into how it relates to our kids, especially kids who have come from hard places. So power is any person's, the ability, capacity, and willingness of an individual, group, or institution to act. That's just the basic Webster definition of power. But power also comes in different forms. And the first one is power over. And so this is going to be where somebody else is making the decision for other people and they don't have a say in it. So this might be a judge. A lot of our kids have come from places where they've experienced power over. A judge has removed them. CPS has, there's all sorts of things where decisions have been made for them and they've lost their power to make those decisions. And, sometimes for their own safety. And that's obviously that we hope that would be the case that it was for safety reasons. And sometimes we as parents, like she was mentioning the hot stove, we're going to have to do some power over to protect that child from hurting themselves. But what that often does is that when kids have had their power taken away from them, they start reacting in ways to any sort of power that's being exercised over them. And so their response tends to be negative or to be pushing back on that. So the next one is power two. And this is a little bit different, but it's one person decides for two other parties. So if you're raising two kids and you say, you go to your room and you go to your room and this is how it's going to happen, they don't get to have a say in how that conflict is resolved, but there is one person who's acting on their behalf. That can also be a civil suit. Power four is when one person assists two others in resolving a conflict. And I think this is a lot of times where we find ourselves as parents, is trying to mediate the conflict between siblings. And you find this may be you at work too. You've got coworkers who are having a disagreement about something, and you're the one who steps in to that role to kind of help navigate that with them. And that's a facilitator role. And then we have power with, and this is when two parties work it out together, whether this is employees or in a marriage where two people each have power in the situation and they come together to work those things out together. And so I'm going to share a story tonight about how taking Sheri's class has really impacted my parenting style. And I do not share this story to make it sound like I have figured this whole thing out and I do this really well, because this has happened successfully one time. But it's a really good illustration of the things that we've talked about and how to help our kids have power in managing their own conflicts so that they feel like they have some say in the matter. And so one of the books, the book that we read in Sheri's class is called The Big Book of Restorative Justice. And it's actually four books that they've combined into one. And there's two processes that they teach you about. One is a circle process, and it's a process of what Linda was talking about earlier. It's about how to make sure that people are feeling heard when there's a conflict going on. And then the other one is victim-offender conferencing, and it's how do you take two people, one who's harmed the other, and how do you get them into a space where they can resolve that conflict and bring healing where there's been harm that has been caused. And so this story is of my two kids that I was working on the yard sale. Actually, I was getting ready for the yard sale, and so I gave my kids options. I said, okay, you can either be out here working with me, you can be inside doing your schoolwork, or you can be doing your chores. But there is no just like laying around doing nothing. You need to be doing something. So make your choice. So one child came out with me, one child said she's gonna do her reading. Okay, great. Child who is with me does not, he's a boy and he's not very old. And so he keeps running in the house, leaving the task that I have given him. What he thinks he sees is his sister on her phone when she said she's supposed to be doing her schoolwork. And he is offended. He is so incensed by the injustice that she's getting away with something, and it's totally unfair. And so they get into it. He starts poking at her, and anyway, it escalates, and she calls him a name that is not appropriate, and they're screaming and crying at each other, and I'm up to here in piles of clothes and shoes, and at the moment I was like, okay, I need you guys just to separate from each other. But they both knew that this was a really big deal and that there were going to be consequences and they were going to have to work this whole thing out. So the guilty party, they're actually both guilty in this situation. They were both hurting each other. But the one who had called her brother a name, she keeps asking, okay, what's my consequence going to be? What's my consequence going to be? And I was like, I need you to give me some space to think about it, but we are going to have this conversation. So we're driving home one day, and I said, okay, so if that had happened to you, what do you think would be a fair consequence for your brother if he was the one who had done it? She's like, well, maybe I should do his chores for a week. And I was like, okay, so I will take that into consideration, but really he's going to be the one, because you did that to him. He's going to have a say in what he needs to make sure that this relationship is restored and to make it feel like that you've made it up to him. And so we finally get them around the table one morning, and I said, okay, so we do the circle process, and we go around and we talk about how each of us experienced this whole blow-up scenario. And the beautiful thing about the circle process is you can't talk to another person. You can only share what you experienced. And so we're going around talking about all of those things and the conflict. I said, okay, so now I'm gonna meet with each individual. I've met with Autumn talking about what she thinks, and I'm gonna meet with Asher, and what do you feel like you need? And so he and I start going through this whole thing. We get them to the table, and I said, okay, Asher, what do you feel like you need from your sister to make it up to you? And he bursts into tears. So what Sheri was talking about, the issue that I thought was the issue is really not the issue. He's like, she never plays with me anymore. He is so, like, he thinks she's on her phone, and he's feeling distanced from her. Like, she doesn't have time for him. She's too grown up for him. He's getting left behind. And I said, okay, thank you for sharing how you're really feeling about this. I said, what would it make it feel like she'd made it up to? He was like, can she just play games with me sometimes? I'm sure she would much prefer playing games over doing his chores for a week. You know, she's being a lot harder on herself than that's not really what he wanted. He didn't want her to be his indentured servant, right? He wants to spend time with her. And so then we flipped it around. I said, okay, Autumn, this is what he did to you. What do you feel like you need from him to make it feel like he's made it up to you? And she's like, I don't know, like maybe we could go shopping together, or like we could bake cookies or something. And so we sat down and we said, okay, let's make a plan. So we wrote out this plan of what they could do to feel like if they had repaired their relationship and they had restored and healed that thing. And so then my husband and I, we took it and we said, okay, we can probably get this done in 2 weeks. Don't expect us to get it all done in one day, because they were like, can we go to Target right now? No, we're not going to Target. But over the next 2 weeks, they made pumpkin roll together, and they went shopping, and we kind of like let them go off in the store by themselves, and they bought like face masks and had a spa night together, and it felt so much better to have that kind of repair in their relationship as opposed to me washing somebody's mouth out with a bar of soap. Because really what I wanted was for them to get along. I didn't want to punish one kid over the other. I really just want, right? Isn't that what we all want? Like, we just want you to get along and stop fighting with each other. I say that a lot. But the processes that I learned in this class, again, I am still so new at this, but that was one of those times, and don't get me wrong, it takes a long time. It would have been much more expedient to put a bar of soap in somebody's mouth and send them on their way. But again, that conflict would have just kept coming up if I had not taken the time to figure out what was really bothering him and really bothering her in this situation. So next month is actually going to be part 2 of this, and I'm going to walk you through circle processes and victim offender conferencing and how you can incorporate those elements in your parenting of kids who really need their voices heard and who really need to be part of those solutions because they've had so much power over in their lives. So I want to thank you guys so much for coming tonight. And Sheri will be teaching the whole content that we took in the summer? So it was a 3-unit class at Fresno Pacific, but it is now going to be offered to any community member. So if you're interested in doing, how many days is it? Is it 5 days of really digging into this? I know for me it has totally changed my perspective on how I participate in conflict and how I can help, or how sometimes I don't alleviate conflict, how I can be a little bit forceful sometimes. And so analyzing myself, then also really how to take these principles and work with my kids and teaching them how to have really positive and healthy conflict resolution. So that class will be available in March. So it'll be available in March, so you're welcome to take that. I believe we have certificates for you guys tonight to get signed off on. And then, last thing, great news. We were awarded the grant to do the sex risk avoidance education program. So we have a meeting coming up this week to kind of figure out all those details. Hopefully that'll be starting around November. So be on the lookout for the details for those classes for if you have kids of that age who you'd like to be a part of that. And last thing, I will also in the Facebook group, if you're in there, I will post the other online conflict style assessment. So you can take that one as well. They're a little bit different. Yes? It's 12 to 17. And so we're looking for about 15 students to participate in that. So we're opening it up to our youth group and to you guys first, and then outside community groups after that.
All right, so I hope you all have some kind of takeaways from tonight. It's great to be with you. I just want to thank you for your warm welcome, and I want to encourage you to think this week as much as you can about your conflict styles, but really just pay attention to yourself. And if what's more important to you, is this relationship more important to you? Because we're always kind of deciding if I want to be right or if I want to be in right relationship. And we can actually be both if we get curious about it. So I would just encourage you to think about that, like not let this kind of just take it while you can and think about it even when you go home tonight or whatever you're thinking about, and just kind of think about how you're engaging conflict, because it really is, conflict actually is an opportunity to pay attention to something that needs to be paid attention to. And the way that we do that can really make a difference.
All right. Thank you guys very much. And there are extra meals that you can feel free to take a bag home and save it for lunch tomorrow. All right, thank you guys.